Welcome to SYNCcast, powered by Commercient. My name is Heath McKnight. Today I'm speaking with Jim Holst, who is the head of sales at Saberpoint. Jim, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about your company and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so my company is called Saberpoint. We've been in business for 31 years. We started off in the cellular IT market, mostly in the cell phone stores, the AT&T stores, things like that. And about 9 years ago, we started to move over into cloud computing. And we work in 4 different verticals in cloud computing. We work in the ERP vertical, where we do NetSuite and SAP. We have an e-commerce vertical, where we work with Shopify. We have an analytics vertical, where we worked with Tableau, which ironically got bought out by Salesforce just recently. And we have a CRM vertical, where we work with Salesforce. And so for myself, I've been in the Salesforce consulting world for 17 years. I started off as a project manager. I worked probably anywhere between 250 and 300 projects over the years. And then I moved over to the evil empire of sales about 4 years ago, and actually coming up on 5. And this is year 31 in software. As I was talking with a customer this morning, they were talking about the old systems that we used. I go, if you want to know how old I am, when I graduated high school and I was dating a young lady back then, I gave her a typewriter for our graduation. So
awesome. I actually learned computers were still very expensive when I was in high school in the early 90s, and we learned on a typewriter.
Yeah.
So because it was just so much cheaper.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, you've been working almost, I think, 6 years shy of how long Salesforce has really been around, which was 1999. We've talked before, and with Salesforce, in my mind, and this is just me, I'll think, oh yeah, medical device manufacturers, regular standard manufacturers of just manufacturing almost anything. Even companies doing service are using Salesforce to kind of go after leads and everything with like a cleaning service or something like that. But you, in conversations in the past, you've told me of industries I hadn't even considered, like hospitality. Yeah. You mentioned energy drinks, et cetera. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Salesforce, its strength is that it really did start from the ground up. In those first 6 years, they were really working with mom and pop companies. Salesforce was not mainstream. When I got involved with Salesforce, I was working for a very, very large company that I will not mention, a very large consulting company. And we evaluated Salesforce as a partner. And this was 17 years ago. And back then that they didn't have enough enterprise level customers. So we decided to pass on them as a partner. However, because of that upbringing with Salesforce, they work in a variety of different verticals inside a business. They work, of course, in healthcare, education, military, government, but they also work for just even the niche companies. Types of companies that have really cropped up in the last 5 years are like cannabis companies, which are being legalized state by state right now. So that's a very popular area. Another area is, as you mentioned before, the energy drink sector. There are these small companies that are creating different types of energy drink products and are using Salesforce to do that. A lot of B2B, a lot of B2C. And particularly what's happening is that Salesforce is integrating with not only the ERPs and the MRPs out there in the world, but they're really, the pandemic made this come very forward very quick, are the EDI sections connecting to the Amazon selling network, for instance, or the Overstock. So Salesforce has an unfortunate name because it's called Salesforce, and people think, pardon me, it's just for selling. And it's not. They do service, they do sales, they do marketing. They have a portal for customer communities. They have specific quoting types of tools. So it's a very, very versatile product.
Yeah, absolutely. And now with Tableau, they have, what I feel the best business analytics software. And trust me, I've used quite a few of them, and I feel like Tableau is if not the best, one of the top ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had also mentioned retail. How much do you see retail using Salesforce? And then I'll tell you a little story about one of our customers that's in retail.
Yeah, actually quite a bit. And it's because of the way that the retail space works, because they work in 2 different major areas, the B2B area and the B2C area. With retail, it's kind of a synergistic approach that Salesforce has used, because what retail will have is they'll have some kind of e-commerce system like a Shopify out there, or using Salesforce's Commerce Cloud. They'll also have an ERP like a NetSuite, like a Sage, like a SAP in the back, and then they'll have the ERP, which is Salesforce. Now, generally what happens is that from the B2C side, most of that is taken care of by the e-commerce product, and that information is then transferred to the ERP. However, in the B2B portion of that, generally it is not done through the e-commerce, but it's done inside of a CRM. And the idea of the CRM is you're able to do orders. So I'm going to send 17 pallets of this particular product over to the Amazon warehouse, for instance. They're going to be able to manage the sales from lead all the way through the opportunity, and they're going to be able to consolidate all of the information, because companies like Commercient will connect to Sage or whatever it happens to be. Mm-hmm. And people will be using the CRM as the graphical user interface center of the universe. They won't have to go into the ERP. The only people who should be in the ERP are the accountants and the inventory people. Salespeople like me should not be in the ERP. They should be up in the CRM, working in the CRM world. And your product allows for that type of connection, but it also allows for that type of infrastructure to happen. So on my B2C side, I'm seeing what's happening as far as the data, because it's going into the ERP, and I can visualize that through Salesforce. And on the B2B side, I can make direct sales for larger companies where I'm shipping pallets and things like that through the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And the story that I find interesting with one of our customers, who they're distributors, and they seem to have a B2B, B2C component. So they sell very high-end appliances and everything. Mm-hmm. So if you need that $10,000 refrigerator, they got you covered. And so I could go into a store. There's actually one not far, and I could purchase a fridge. Or if I am a general contractor building very high-end houses, and let's say I'm building like 5 of them at once, I can approach it that way too. So they have that retail side, but they also have that B2B side, and their ERP was, I won't say what it would log in, and I looked at the UI, I was like, wow, this is 2001, 2002. Yeah. And they told me, they wouldn't tell me the cost, but somebody else who's an ERP consultant, he guessed it, and he said, just to even have a conversation, you're looking at millions, really. And he was joking, but it would be millions to upgrade it. So what they did, and I thought it was very clever, was they implemented Salesforce, and then they needed to do it, like you said, to help with the sales. But what they did was they moved almost everybody, people who normally would be in the ERP, which was just too much. It was very hard to work with. They're all in Salesforce, and then we're syncing that, and they're using it beyond just the marketing, service, sales, et cetera. They're using it almost like it is the ERP replacement. Exactly. And I thought that was just so fascinating. And then, of course, the cost of Salesforce and Commercient is far less. I mean, when I finally found out the cost $2-3 million, I couldn't believe it. But that really can happen, and I just found that fascinating for them, and it kind of tied in a little bit with the B2C.
Well, you're making a really good point here, and that this is actually a very more common use case than you realize. You will have companies, whether they're retail companies or manufacturers or whoever it happens to be, have systems that are 20, 25, even 30 years old. Yeah. And what happens is that their salespeople are still using those systems to go in and try to make a sale. And then they're out on the road. And instead of having, a cell phone with them to put their stuff in, they got their good old notebook with them, or they have whatever it happens to be. And so that business knowledge is staying with the salesperson. So to the point that you're making, what happens is that you're moving folks out of the ERP and you're putting them into CRM land. So you don't have to have licenses for them in the ERP. Even with more recent ERPs, they don't need the license. And they're going to be able to do their work in real time. And also to the point that you're making, if they're out on the road, instead of using a notebook, now they're using their phones, and they're able to complete their sales. And because they're not ERP dependent, they're able to do other things like marketing and other things that CRMs do much stronger than what an ERP can.
Yeah, absolutely. And also when they're on the road, and I've talked to customers who they're like, yeah, we have one person in the office, everything is out on the road. In fact, they're so widespread around the country, whether it's America, Canada, et cetera, that they could be hundreds of miles from the home office, if not thousands. So they need that phone, and then to be able to pull up certain things like, what did this customer, I see this company maybe once a year, twice a year, and they order kind of oddball, they're not regular. They can quickly pull up what their last order was, and they can just quickly go in, say, hey, you ordered X number of widgets. Can I put you down? And that power of having that basic ERP data to see, hey, did this person pay that invoice? Is this sales call going to become a, hey, you got to kind of pay this invoice? And I think that's also pretty great for the outside sales.
It really is. And what it's doing is, and you're kind of implying this, is it's pushing the paradigm that we were used to for years and years and years. Sales in this silo, service in this silo, marketing in this silo. Mm-hmm. And what will happen is because the ERP is connected through Commercient into Salesforce, salespeople are going to be able to see when people call up and say, hey, where is my widget? Where is this? Where is that? They're going to be able to look in there without having to make a request and say, oh, I'm going to remake a request to the ERP team. Can you check this out for me? And then 24 or 36 hours later, they get back to the customer. Rather, they're getting back to the customer right there on the phone. It increases the customer satisfaction. It increases everything about the whole process. And again, you're putting people that should be in the CRM, and people who should be in the ERP, and not kind of crossing the streams, as they would say in Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Don't cross the streams. It could be bad.
Yeah, no. That's awesome. Now, a little bit more about Saberpoint and the CRM side of things, because I think you probably gave the best example of why somebody needs Salesforce, and that is, and there's nothing wrong. Like, I finally got out of the habit a few years ago of taking manual notes, and now I do everything digital just because it's easier to access. Yeah. Even if it's something personal, I can jot a note and then pull it up if I'm, at the store or something like that. But it's sales gets so, I guess, silo. But I think probably the most common thing I hear about the need for Salesforce is everything is stuck on somebody's computer, or it's stuck in their head, or it's stuck on the Rolodex, that kind of a thing. They don't know where anything is. It's in a copy of a copy of a copy of a spreadsheet that nobody knows if it's, which version is which and everything. And nobody has any idea what's going on in the sales pipeline. And I was wondering if you could talk to me about how Saberpoint, how you approach that, because I think you hear these kind of horror stories, if you will, of using all of these. And I'm sure it worked for them, but it's time to modernize and get the Salesforce and everything.
Yeah, there's a couple of things with that, Heath. Number one is that small companies and medium companies think that they're the only ones in the world that do this. And I have news for you. Probably 90%, if not more, of the companies that I work with are still on paper in some way, shape, or form, or on extended, how can I say this, Excel files that feed other Excel files that feed other Excel files that feed other Excel files. And this is extraordinarily common. And I have seen this at Fortune 500 companies as well to this day. What we try to do here at Saberpoint is that when we do an implementation, we are thinking about the whole ecosystem, the ERP, the MRP, the e-commerce, and the CRM itself. And one of the fears that people have going away from paper is like, well, I can just write down what I need and just go forward, where these systems are asking me for all this data and it takes me forever to do this, and it's Big Brother. And the thing is that's not what it's supposed to be. Our kind of motto is that your process drives the application rather than the application driving the process. And because of that, what we do at the beginning is we do interviews with the different types of personas and people who are using the product itself, and get what their nomenclature is, get what their process is. So when a salesperson comes in, they're not seeing 100 different fields. They're seeing the fields that they need to execute business. And the thing that's very important is that we'll ask the salesperson, what do you need to collect as you're going through the process, and they say, I go out on the customer site and I sit there and listen to them, and then I walk out the door and I just do my notes. And I'm like, well, this is really easy. Customer visit, and then we have a notes field, and then you take the Siri button and say, okay, Siri, blah, 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 and do it. And you move on, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, this is great. So we try to make it towards what they do rather than what the product does. Because, when we were growing up, Heath, we didn't have control over software. Microsoft would release something like a Word, and then we'd have to wait 3-4 years for the next major update. With a lot of these SaaS products, software as a service, you can change them on the fly. You can make fields invisible. You can move things around. That's what the advantage is. And then what's happening is a lot of the transactions that are happening in the background where you don't have to see it. And Commercient is connecting to the ERPs and executing those transactions for them. So that's what makes it the win.
Awesome. And some conversations you and I have had in the past, I think one of the things that I really appreciate what you and your company do is you really take the time, like you said, you interview them, you help them to let that process drive the software versus a company that might just come in, get it implemented, get a basic training, and then get on to the next one. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, then it's like, okay, we're just trying to get as many sales as humanly possible, as many, and they're not taking care of the customer. And I think that's like one of the big reasons why some companies have like adoption issues. And I don't think it's the software's fault. I just think that they don't have the right partner, if you will, such as Saberpoint. If you could go in a little bit more detail about how you can really help those companies to kind of really adopt those, not just Salesforce, but best practices while still using some of their same everyday habits, techniques, et cetera, processes to really, just make it better for how they do their daily activities.
Oh, without a doubt. There's two ways to answer this. The first way I'm going to answer this is the type of company that you hire. To the point that you're talking about, when you bring in a third-party company like a Saberpoint in the world, you want to make sure that they are consultants and not contractors. And what I mean by that is that when I started in the world of consulting, I worked for Big Blue. And the one thing that they told me is that the people we work with are clients. They're not customers, because what we're doing is we're giving them a solution. And the idea here is that when you're working with these third-party strategic integrators like Saberpoint, is you want to make sure that they have some kind of process, some kind of methodology that's in there, because that's where they're looking at your process. This is where they're doing the proper testing. Because if you're doing it from a contracting perspective, they'll go right off the contract and say, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And it doesn't mean that your people, process, and technology have been integrated into your solution. That's one of the big misses. As far as change management is concerned, that's really one of the big issues inside of the world of any product that you put into place, whether it's software or even manufacturing for, is that you have to have some kind of change management in there. A couple of things that I talk about with change management. Number one is make sure that you get executive buy-in. You need executives to be a part of this, and you need them to be excited about the product and using the product and having people be able to visually see this. Number two is to make sure that you have a communication flow, not only saying this is what's going on with the project, but having people in the company involved with it so that they know it's not just something that's being pushed to them, but something that they help to contribute to. Number three, and this one is really one of the more difficult ones for folks, is that when you are ready to roll, is that you have to shut off the old process and the old product. And the reason why I say this is that I have walked into companies more times than I really want to admit to, where they are still using the old software. I had a call center that it was a massive call center, 1,200 people. 780 people were still using the old software, where the call center manager swore to me that they were not. And that was a problem. I was brought in to do a change management project for a medical device company. And the problem is that the CEO was the problem. She wanted an Excel spreadsheet and reports filled out by each one of her salesperson delivered directly to her. And she's like, why aren't people using this? And they're like, they don't have a need to, because you're asking them to do the same thing on a spreadsheet. So you have to get rid of those old processes. And, the final thing is not only training, but making sure that the change management continues throughout the process. Because a lot of times what happens is that the product is released, and then nothing else is ever done to it. And because of that, it either dies, it has a slow death, and it's a slow unknown death. And a lot of times we get calls from CEOs or managers that says, we've been paying for this software for 4 years and we haven't done anything with it. And we can easily go into usage and see, there's only 8 people out of 200 that are logging onto it because there's no governance in there. And that it's not a technology issue. It is a people issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for those tips. Before we wrap up, your background is really fascinating.
Thank you.
You were, while you were building your career, you were also in the U.S. Navy Reserves. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and then what you're doing now, which is you're also a professor.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. So
Yeah,
let's talk a little bit about the your time in the Naval Reserves.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very common for my family. My brother, for instance, is a firefighter flight medic cop. That's what he does every day. He's a full-time firefighter.
Wow.
He's a full-time flight medic, and he's a part-time cop. So it's what he does. And it's just become a part of our life. I grew up in a restaurant that my parents owned, and you were a very independent person. You needed to do things. So when I got into college, I was like, I just can't do college. So while I was in college, they had a rescue service in there, and I became a medic and worked as a medic while I was in college. And then as far as the Navy is concerned, I got involved with the Navy back in 1996 as a reservist. I had an opportunity I was made aware of, and I came in as an enlisted person. Now, this is all part-time. My full-time job was in IT.
Wow.
And I worked I was enlisted first and worked as a network engineer. And then I got my commission, and I worked as a intelligence officer for 18 years. I got deployed to the war just before Iraq broke out in 2003. Mm-hmm. And I worked over at U.S. Central Command, and I got to see more than I ever imagined that I ever would. It was a great experience, and I enjoyed doing it, and I did it for 21 years. And I retired about 5 years ago from that. And in the meanwhile, back in 1999, or should I say back in 94, I started to get my MBA online from a very unknown school, which is very well known today, called University of Phoenix. And I was in their first accredited group going through their MBA program. The way I got onto school was through a modem. It was using a DOS-based program on a bulletin board. Yeah. And I got my MBA there. It was really a great experience. They did an excellent job. And then I said to myself, geez, I'd really like to teach. And I asked them, and they're like, yeah, we'll take you on 2 years after you get out of your MBA. I got on. I started teaching business. I taught business for 17 years. And then one of my buddies in the Navy worked for Northeastern University and said, do you want to teach in our homeland and strategic intelligence program? I'm like, yep. So I moved over there, and I've been teaching now online for 23 years. I'm a dinosaur in the online world. Wow. Yeah. People they're like, you did that when? And I'm like, yeah, I did that 23 years ago. And so, and I've been doing it ever since. Yeah. And I was very fortunate when I was at Northeastern. They just said, hey, we need people with terminal degrees. And I'm like, yeah, you going to pay for it? They're like, yep. And I'm like, great. So I got my doctorate while I was there. So it was a great experience. I'm still there today.
That's fantastic. Wow. So just like your brother, you got so many different hats that you wear and everything. Wow. Yeah. That's just amazing. Yeah. And last question, how does this background in helping companies to essentially digital transformation help you when you're talking? Now, you're not teaching that, but how does that kind of drive like what you do teaching, or at least maybe just reaching out and talking to the students in general? Again, I know it's two different things.
No, actually, it's not. It's very synergistic, to coin the phrase Stephen Covey used. And the reason why I say that is that I have always been a jack of all trades. It's one of the things that I did. Like I told you in college, I was a medic for fun. And like, okay, why are you doing this? I'm like, why not? But I always thought that was a bit of a weakness. But what I found is that when I started to get into the world of consulting and I started to look at these larger enterprise level systems, is that these enterprise level systems were not specific. They were not niche. They were jacks of all trade. Salesforce is a jack of all trade. NetSuite is a jack of all trade. And because I was always thinking like that, it became very natural to me to understand how sales, service, marketing, all the different verticals that are going to be using the different products and where they end up happen to be. So digital transformation goes both ways. It is about the people and process and the way that you set the system up, and the technology, which is going to give you the results of a proper setup of those systems. And it's about the integration between all of the different systems itself, because 20 years ago, even to the point that you're making about issues that we had today, if I wanted to, I would have to go into one system to get human resources. I have to go into another system to get sales, another system to get inventory. And now it is really more centralized. And it is more that even competing companies are saying, I have to be open. NetSuite says, I have to be compatible with Salesforce. Salesforce says, I have to be compatible with NetSuite. Mm-hmm. And that's what's really brought out the strength of all of these products over the years. So it's good to have that kind of experience, because that's exactly what these systems are doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me today, Heath.